The cameras flashed in Ouagadougou as Captain Ibrahim Traoré held in his hands the very first passport of the Alliance of Sahel states. What seemed like a simple leather-bound document was in truth something else. A rupture in the script that Africa has been forced to follow for decades. For the first time, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stepped onto the stage with a joint declaration of independence, written not in speeches, but in the ink of a new passport. The symbolism was immense. Only months earlier, the three nations had broken away from ECOWAS and the West African Monetary Union, rejecting the weight of external dictates. Now they returned not with empty hands, but with their own instrument of mobility, a badge of belonging that told the world, sovereignty can be carried in your pocket. Yet within hours, storms of doubt erupted online. Was this passport already useless? Would Europe refuse it? Would China dismiss it? The truth is larger than the rumors. The AES passport is not paper. It is a statement, a challenge, and a mirror held up to global hierarchies. Stay with us. This is not just a headline, it is a turning point. Subscribe now and walk with us into the heart of the story. On the 2nd of February 2025, a stage was set in Ouagadougou that carried the weight of history. The Alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, unveiled their collective passport before citizens, cameras, and the watching world. In the bright Sahelian sun, ordinary people queued to receive the document. Their faces told the story better than any headline. Pride, relief, and a quiet defiance. For decades, Africans had traveled on papers shaped in Paris, Brussels, or London. That morning, they held something crafted on their own terms. The symbolism ran deeper than the cover of deep blue and the gold insignia of AES. It was the culmination of a journey that began with rupture. In 2024, the three nations had walked out of ECOWAS in the West African Monetary Union, accusing them of acting as instruments of external influence. That break was not merely institutional. It was emotional, the severing of chains that had long dictated how sovereignty was measured. By introducing their own passport, they answered critics who predicted isolation. Instead of retreating, they built anew. Passports are more than travel documents. They are the physical embodiment of belonging. They declare to the world, these are our citizens, this is our political order, these are our borders. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, nations often described as fragile or dependent, the act of producing a shared passport was nothing less than revolutionary. It was a seed planted in the Sahel's dry soil, proof that sovereignty can germinate even in harsh conditions. The rollout was carefully orchestrated. Government officials stood beside ordinary men and women, handing out the new passports, ensuring that cameras captured not only the leaders, but the citizens who would carry this symbol across continents. Africa News and regional broadcasters aired footage of farmers, traders, and students lifting their documents proudly, as if holding up a shield. The message was simple yet profound. Sovereignty is not abstract. It is tangible. Still, the launch was not merely ceremonial. It was also technical. AES leaders emphasized that the passport had been designed in compliance with the International Civil Aviation Organization standards. That detail mattered. Recognition at airports and border posts does not depend on the goodwill of one country, but on conformity to ICAO rules. By anchoring their passport in those global frameworks, the Sahelian governments ensured that, from day one, it carried legitimacy. For citizens, however, the significance was emotional rather than procedural. Many still held older ECOWAS documents that remained valid, yet they rushed to inquire about the new one. Why? Because carrying the AES passport was no longer just about moving across borders. It was about carrying proof that their nations were capable of defining themselves. Pride was the currency, not convenience. As the day closed, celebrations echoed in Ouagadougou, Niamey, and Bamako. Three capitals united not only by geography, but by a shared defiance against being judged through foreign eyes. The event was supposed to be a straightforward administrative announcement. Instead, it became a historic proclamation. Africa could create, Africa could certify, Africa could belong, without borrowing stamps of approval. But every seed planted in African soil faces the winds of resistance. Within hours of this unveiling, another story began to rise online, one that threatened to overshadow the pride of that morning. Rumors multiplied. Claims surfaced that the passport had already been rejected abroad. A wave of doubt rolled faster than the images of celebration. The question was no longer about what had happened in Ouagadougou, but about what the world was prepared to accept. Would the AES passport survive the storm of narratives unleashed against it, or would it be buried before it had the chance to grow? The morning after the launch, the internet was already ablaze. TikTok videos with dramatic captions declared the AES passport the shortest lived in history. Twitter threads claimed that French border officials had refused it. Facebook posts alleged that the European Union had banned it. Even slickly edited clips circulated, suggesting that China, the very partner long seen as sympathetic to African independence, had denied recognition. For the ordinary citizen scrolling through these feeds, the contradictions hardly mattered. What mattered was the speed, the sheer velocity with which doubt spread. The AES passport had been alive for less than 24 hours, yet it was already being buried beneath a mountain of ridicule. A symbol of sovereignty was recast overnight as a meme of failure. This was the high point of the storm, the clash between hope and humiliation. Many citizens wondered aloud, if their passport was already being rejected abroad, what was the point of carrying it? How could leaders unveil it with such confidence if the world had already closed its doors? The confusion was real, but it was also engineered. Analysts from disinfo.africa, a regional fact-checking platform, later concluded that coordinated networks had amplified the same false narratives across multiple languages and platforms. These were not random misunderstandings. They were deliberate attempts to delegitimize. Western media headlines added fuel to the fire. Instead of celebrating a new step toward African integration, they framed the story around rejection. Phrases like question recognition and uncertain legitimacy dominated coverage, even before clarifications were available. The framing was subtle but effective. It cast doubt as the default. To global readers, the story became less about sovereignty and more about suspicion. Inside the Sahel, however, leaders refused to stay silent. Officials reminded the public that the passport complied with International Civil Aviation Organization standards. In simple terms, that meant no country could arbitrarily reject it at airports. Compliance with ICAO was a shield. Yet in the noise of viral videos, technical details rarely win. What mattered was perception, and perception had already tilted toward rejection. But perception is not destiny. As footage from Africa News and national broadcasters spread, a different narrative emerged. Viewers saw citizens proudly holding their passports. They saw queues of applicants forming in Bamako and Niamey. They saw evidence that the document was not a rumor, but a reality. In the battle between image and misinformation, images of real people became the strongest weapon. The emotional intensity rose further when diaspora communities weighed in. Africans abroad began posting photos with captions like, "I will travel with pride." Local influencers challenged viral lies by showing themselves at embassies, submitting visa applications with the AES passport. Slowly, the ridicule turned to defiance. The passport became more than a document. It became a rallying cry. Yet the question lingered. Who would be the first major power to accept or reject this passport openly? Would Europe stand in the way? Would China step forward? Would silence itself become a form of denial? These uncertainties kept the controversy alive, transforming what should have been a bureaucratic detail into a geopolitical drama. At the heart of this drama was a paradox. On paper, the AES passport was valid from the very start. But in the digital theater of perception, it was already being buried. The gap between legality and narrative had never been so stark. The controversy had elevated a booklet of pages into a front line of sovereignty. As the second week unfolded, the storm showed no signs of calming. The AES had lit a flame, but the winds of disinformation threatened to snuff it out. Every tweet, every viral clip, every headline seemed designed to push one question onto African citizens. Can your sovereignty ever be real if outsiders laugh at it? The world had watched the launch. Now it would watch the test. Which would come first? Rejection from powerful consulates, or recognition that could silence the rumors? The storm of disinformation did not merely play out on screens. It rippled into daily life across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. In the markets of Bamako, vendors debated whether the new passport would allow their sons to travel. In the streets of Niamey, students questioned if they should apply for the AES document or renew their expiring ECOWAS booklets. For many, the uncertainty was not academic. It touched their plans, their savings, their very sense of mobility. Short-term consequences were clear. Confusion eroded trust. Citizens who had welcomed the passport with joy now hesitated, fearing humiliation at foreign airports. Some whispered that applying for it might be wasted money if the world rejected it. This erosion of confidence was precisely what disinformation networks intended. By striking at the everyday meaning of sovereignty, they turned an administrative decision into a psychological wound. But the midterm impact told a different story. As clarifications emerged that the passport met International Civil Aviation Organization standards, that EU systems were slowly updating, that China had confirmed recognition, confidence returned. Citizens who initially doubted began to line up again. Pride outweighed hesitation. Carrying the AES passport became not just a matter of travel, but a statement of identity. People no longer asked only, "Can I use it?" They asked, "What does it say about who we are?" In Burkina Faso especially, the symbolism was profound. After years of instability, from insurgencies to economic hardship, the sight of a collective document represented stability of another kind, a unity forged in defiance. Ibrahim Traoré himself described the passport as a shield of independence. The choice of words was deliberate. A shield does not remove danger, but it protects against attack. By placing that shield in the hands of ordinary farmers, traders, and teachers, the AES democratized sovereignty. Political ramifications spread quickly. Critics who had mocked the withdrawal from ECOWAS now faced evidence that alternatives could be built. The passport became a counter-argument to the claim that leaving regional blocs meant isolation. Instead of retreating, the Sahelian states had shown resilience. The image of a farmer in Ouagadougou holding a passport with gold insignia became a direct challenge to those who insisted that Africa could not stand alone. Economic implications were subtler but significant. The ability to travel with a recognized passport is essential for trade. Traders moving goods across borders needed assurance that their documents would be respected. The AES passport, though still young, carried within it the promise that commerce could continue without being hostage to external frameworks. In this sense, the passport was not only about identity, it was about livelihood. Of course, challenges remained. Bureaucratic delays in Europe meant that some applications were still processed manually, fueling ongoing rumors of rejection. Opposition figures within the Sahel pointed to these hiccups as proof of recklessness. Yet their voices were increasingly drowned out by the tangible evidence of citizens using the document abroad. Photos of Schengen visas stamped into the AES passport began to circulate online. Reality pushed back against narrative. Here lies the deeper political lesson. Sovereignty cannot survive on paper alone. It must be lived in daily interactions, at borders, in embassies, in the hands of citizens. The AES passport achieved precisely this. It transformed sovereignty from a speech into a lived experience. Even in its contested first weeks, it inspired resilience. It is in this context that many observers connected the passport to the broader political upheavals of recent years, especially the dramatic leadership changes in the Sahel. Critics and supporters alike noted that without the rupture of 2022 in Burkina Faso, without the Ibrahim Traoré coup that redefined national priorities, such a radical initiative would have been unthinkable. The passport thus stood not only as an administrative reform, but as a continuation of political revolution, a physical emblem of the choices made in those turbulent years. And yet one question remained unresolved. Would the passport's success within the Sahel translate into recognition abroad, where narratives of suspicion still lingered? Could three landlocked nations convince the world that their sovereignty was not a temporary gesture, but a permanent reality? The eyes of citizens now turned outward, to Europe, to America, to China. How would the wider world respond to this audacious claim of independence? The AES passport did not exist in a vacuum. Its launch forced the world to reveal its reflexes, some hesitant, others decisive. In Europe, the reaction was marked by confusion. Early applicants found themselves caught in limbo. Consulates did not refuse them outright, yet their systems had not been updated. Clerks fumbled with outdated software, manually overriding entries or placing applications on hold. For ordinary travelers, the experience looked like rejection. For critics online, it was easy fuel to shout, "Europe has refused Africa again." But the truth was more complex. The Schengen system is centralized, designed to require collective approval for any new documentation. Updates are slow, even for European partners. For the Sahel, the pace was glacial. Yet the silence of European authorities in those crucial early weeks allowed misinformation to spread unchecked. Only by mid-February did embassies confirm that the AES passport was valid for visa applications once databases were aligned. By then, the damage had been done. This unevenness revealed something deeper. Countries with strong colonial ties to the Sahel, especially France, were the slowest to clarify. Others with less historical baggage quietly adapted. The delay spoke less of bureaucracy than of politics. Recognition of African sovereignty was never neutral. It was filtered through the lenses of history and power. China's response could not have been more different. Within days of the launch, embassies in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou issued statements confirming recognition. The Foreign Ministry in Beijing reinforced the message. The AES passport was valid, and rumors of rejection were false. The swiftness carried symbolic weight. It was not just an administrative update. It was a gesture of respect. Where Europe hesitated, China acted. Where Europe left room for speculation, Beijing eliminated doubt. For the Sahelian states, this difference mattered. Their sovereignty had been validated not reluctantly, but immediately. The move aligned with China's broader Africa policy, a strategy built on infrastructure, trade, and partnership rather than lectures. Critics in Western think tanks saw the recognition as opportunism, a way to expand influence in a region where French power was receding. Yet for citizens of the Sahel, motives mattered less than outcomes. Their passport worked abroad, and that was proof enough. And what of the United States? Here the record falls silent. No official statement emerged in the immediate weeks after the launch. The absence itself spoke volumes. America's role was not defined by rejection or affirmation, but by a void. In the silence, others shaped the narrative. In the end, the AES passport became a mirror reflecting international attitudes. Europe hesitated, China embraced. The United States remained muted. Each response revealed not only policy but philosophy. Was African sovereignty something to be delayed, doubted, or respected? As the dust settled, one question loomed larger. What path lay ahead for the Sahel? Isolation, fragile acceptance, or a bold new era of integration on its own terms? The unveiling of the AES passport was only the beginning. For the governments of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the challenge now lies not in printing documents, but in sustaining legitimacy. Every border crossing, every visa stamp, every citizen who travels with the new booklet will either strengthen or weaken the credibility of the sovereignty project. In the short term, the outlook is mixed. On the one hand, citizens have embraced the passport as a badge of dignity. Photos of travelers with Schengen visas and Chinese entry stamps have already circulated, providing visible proof that the world cannot dismiss it. On the other hand, disinformation campaigns will not stop. For those invested in undermining African independence, the passport remains an easy target. A single story of rejection at a consulate can be amplified online to drown out dozens of successful journeys. In the medium term, the AES passport could become a cornerstone of regional integration. By pooling their sovereignty into a single document, the three Sahelian states have signaled that they are not retreating into isolation, but reimagining cooperation on their own terms. This experiment could inspire others across the continent. If three landlocked nations can create a working alternative to ECOWAS, what prevents larger unions from following? The passport also holds economic significance. Mobility is the lifeblood of trade. Farmers, traders, and small entrepreneurs depend on ease of travel to sustain livelihoods. If the AES passport continues to gain recognition, it will not only symbolize dignity, but also enable commerce. Sovereignty will be measured not only in speeches, but in markets, contracts, and exchanges across borders. Risks remain. European hesitation could harden into restrictive policy if political tensions deepen. Some African neighbors might resist recognizing the document out of fear of antagonizing traditional partners. And internally, the AES must prove that the passport is more than symbolism, that it comes with efficient systems, anti-fraud safeguards, and accessibility for ordinary citizens. Without these, the project could falter under its own weight. Yet the opportunities outweigh the threats. The quick recognition by China, the resilience of citizens against disinformation, and the visible pride of ordinary people suggest that the passport has already outlived its detractors. It has shifted the conversation from dependency to defiance, from ridicule to resilience. In the years ahead, the real test will be whether the AES passport remains a solitary initiative or evolves into a wider revolution in African self-definition. The soil has been tilled, the seed planted. What grows will depend on the courage of leaders and the determination of citizens to water it with persistence. The question is no longer whether the passport exists, but whether it can endure. Can this shield of independence become the roadmap for Africa's future? The story of the AES passport is not just about paper and ink. It is about the audacity of three nations to say, our sovereignty is not negotiable. In Ouagadougou, in Bamako, in Niamey, citizens now carry a document that affirms their place in the world without waiting for permission. That act alone has shifted the balance of perception. What began as a source of ridicule has turned into a shield of independence. The journey of this passport mirrors the emotional arc of sovereignty itself. At first there was anger. Anger at the waves of misinformation that mocked it before it could breathe. Then came regret. Regret that a moment of celebration was hijacked by headlines of suspicion. But as the weeks passed, hope emerged. Hope carried in the hands of ordinary men and women who refused to surrender their dignity. Today, pride stands at the forefront. Pride that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso dared to write their own names into history. Yet the passport also forces us to ask larger questions. Who decides whether Africa is legitimate, Africans themselves, or outsiders with entrenched interests? Can sovereignty be dismissed with a rumor? Or is it validated every time a citizen crosses a border with dignity? These questions do not belong only to the Sahel. They belong to the entire continent and perhaps to the wider world as well. This is why the AES passport matters. It is not only a tool of travel, it is a declaration. It is a reminder that the Ibrahim Traoré coup was not an isolated rupture, but part of a wider movement to reclaim agency. It is a continuation of the Burkina Faso Revolution that refuses to be silenced. And as long as citizens carry it, they carry more than a document. They carry the proof that sovereignty is lived, not granted. If this story resonates with your sense of justice, do not turn away. Subscribe, share, and stand with us as we follow the path of Africa's unfolding independence. The AES passport has written its first chapter. The question that remains is whether the world is ready to read the rest.